Welcome to our final content unit. Over the past 5 weeks, we've examined many different kinds of women's work. One theme has emerged again and again. It's that work is never just about earning a paycheck, it's about power. Who has authority in the workplace, whose labor is valued, who is considered respectable, who gets to define appropriate behavior? These questions bring us to our final unit sex, power, and the workplace. I want you to think about an important question. How have ideas about women's sexuality affected their opportunities at work? As you'll see, employers, governments, and the public have often judged women workers not only by how well they perform their jobs, but also by whether they conform to expectations about femininity, morality, and respectability. As we saw a couple weeks ago, World War II transformed the American workforce. Between 1940 and 1945, more than 6 million women entered the paid workforce, many taking jobs that had previously been reserved almost exclusively for men. Women became welders, electricians, machinists, mechanics, and aircraft builders. Rosie the Riveter became the national symbol of patriotic womanhood. And as you saw in the film, government propaganda celebrated women workers while often obfuscating their realities. And of course, the government wanted women to work, but only temporarily. Officials repeatedly reassured the public that women would return home after the war ended. Magazine articles emphasized that women could operate industrial machinery without becoming unfeminine. Advertisements showed women wearing lipstick while welding airplanes or neatly styled hair beneath factory bandanas. In other words, women were expected to perform traditionally masculine roles while still embodying traditional femininity. That tension shaped nearly every aspect of women's wartime experiences. And this week, you will also read part of Georgia Sadler's oral history with her own experiences as a Rosie. One reason historians love oral histories is that they reveal experiences that official documents often leave out. Government reports might tell us how many women worked in a factory. Payroll records tell us how much they earned. But oral histories tell us something else. How did workers actually feel? What relationships did they build? What challenges did they face every day? Sadler reflects on the excitement of wartime employment, but also the realities of working in male dominated spaces. And her story reminds us that Rosie the Riveter wasn't a single experience. Some women love factory work, but they also experience discrimination, harassment, and assault. And that obviously was not part of the wartime propaganda that promised that women would be safe on the job. And so these personal narratives really complicate the neat patriotic image we've inherited. Another one of this week's readings explores something historians largely ignored until recently: government efforts to regulate women's sexuality during World War II. Military leaders believed that sexually transmitted infections posed a threat to the war effort. During World War I, thousands of soldiers had been hospitalized with venereal diseases, removing them from military service. During World War II, officials were determined to reduce those numbers, as you can see in these propaganda posters. Instead of focusing primarily on soldiers' behaviors, many public health campaigns concentrated on women. Women suspected of prostitution, or sometimes simply women who socialized with soldiers, could be investigated, questioned, detained, or subjected to medical examinations. The assumption that women were responsible for maintaining sexual morality. This reflected much older ideas about dating back to the 19th century, where women were often portrayed as either respectable or fallen. Wartime policies reinforced those stereotypes. One example comes from communities surrounding military bases. Local officials sometimes monitored dance halls, restaurants, and movie theaters because they believed these spaces encouraged immoral behavior. Young women out with servicemen could become subjects of public suspicion even if they had done nothing illegal. These policies remind us that governments have not only regulated work, they've also attempted to regulate women's bodies. And finally, our film for the week moves us forward several decades, but you'll notice some familiar themes. Live Nude Girls Unite follows dancers at the Lusty Lady Theater in San Francisco as they organize to improve working conditions. At first glance, this might seem completely different from previous weeks. But think about the questions we've been asking all semester. Who deserves safe working conditions? Who deserves fair wages? Whose labor counts? Who gets to organize? The answers confront many of the same issues we've seen before: workplace surveillance, unfair management, unequal power relations, retaliation against organizing, and demanding respect and dignity on the job. The biggest difference is that these workers also face an additional obstacle, and that's the stigma. Because they work in the adult entertainment industry, many assume that they don't deserve the same workplace protections as other workers. The film asks us to question that assumption. Whether someone works in a factory, a hospital, a private home, or a strip club, they are still workers. That question, who counts as a worker deserving rights, has followed us throughout the course. So, one of the things that I hope you'll notice is that each week's topic builds on the previous one. We began by asking what counts as work. Then we examined factory labor, caregiving, immigrant labor, labor organizing. This week tries to bring many of those themes together: women navigating unequal workplaces, questions about dignity and respect. You'll see workers organizing collectively. You'll see how gender expectations continue to shape working lives. And most importantly, you'll see that work is never just economic, it's also deeply personal. Our identities, our gender, race, sexuality, citizenship, and family responsibilities, among others, all influence our experiences at work. And so, as you complete this week's materials, try to keep in mind: when does control over someone's work become control over their body, reputation, and personal life? This question connects every source you'll encounter this week. So by the end of the unit, I hope that you'll see that the history of women's labor is not simply the history of jobs, it's all the history of who has been allowed to work, under what conditions, and who has had the power to define what kind of work and what kind of workers deserve dignity, respect, and protection.